I'm Rosemary Lee, and I'm a choreographer, and I also make films and teach and things. And how did I get involved? So I got involved with Chisenhale probably in mid to late 80s. And I had got back from New York. I graduated from the Laban Center in 1981. And I went to New York soon after and came backwards and forwards, but was based in New York for 3 or 4 years. And then probably it was on my return that I was looking for a base and looking for a place to feel at home, having left my kind of base in New York in a way, and the loft scene there and things like that. So Chisenhale seemed kind of close to that maybe, but also I was working with Sue McLennan, who was very involved in Chisenhale. So my guess is that I got to know Chisenhale because of Sue, and I was doing workshops there and starting to dance for her. I think so. And I did know about X6. I certainly saw 1 or 2 performances there, but I think I was away in New York during the sort of move. So those early years of Chisenhale, I presume I didn't know so much about. That's my feeling. Yeah. So that's how I got involved. I guess you could say through mostly through Sue, but also through this desire to find a home base.
What do you think it was about Chisenhale as opposed to other places in London like Riverside or other dance spaces that might have had space, like you said? But what was it about Chisenhale that kind of appealed to you and your practice?
I think there was a sense that it was artist-led, and that I imagine then that was a huge draw for me, and that it felt like it was responsive, and that it was serving the needs of an arts community and a dance community, and that I was interested in the sort of more the sort of on the edge practice, the more alternative styles of movement, not the mainstream contemporary styles, the more somatic, the contact release, that kind of work that perhaps was more, I felt like Chisenhale would be the place where I would find that the most. But I think the fact that it was led by artists rather than a kind of mainstream organization that had particular ways of presenting work that I felt I didn't want to kind of slot into. I wanted to find a new way of making work in Britain and showing it and sharing it, and Chisenhale felt like a sort of safe place to start. And often I guess when you don't have those kind of relationships and you're not funded regularly and you're not on the touring circuit, you feel you're sort of a bit lost as an independent artist. So this was a place where we gathered somehow and supported each other, and that felt really good. And I felt that a bit in New York as well, but very strongly so at Chisenhale. And then I think in terms of when you say my practice, so I suppose it was looking at different ways of moving and different ways of making work, and a lot about improvisation as well as somatic kind of movements, and the way Sue was making work, although we did tour and toured sort of small to middle scale venues, and you could say that was a little bit more conventional. She still made work. She trained at Dartington, so she made work, I think, in a different way to how the more mainstream choreographers were working. And I love that kind of where you were devising together and your input was important. So, and then I think also I was probably really taken with the fact that there was this real mix of genres and this welcoming of the drumming workshops and the Irish step dances and the different, and the ballroom dancers and the children. And I really had a belief that we needed to have our arms wide open, embrace these different ways of dancing and being together. And Chisenhale really did that. And that certainly, you wouldn't see that kind of programming anywhere else. So I think I was drawn to that as well, this mix of kind of trying to be an arts centre in the midst of a community, but also supporting kind of cutting edge dance work. That combination really definitely I was really influenced by that, because I loved art centres, actually, centres that had that kind of mix. But Chisenhale was a kind of home to different kinds of people, and I really, really liked that.
When you were talking then, I was sort of thinking, both in terms of what drew you personally and also in terms of your practice, seems like the possibility or the possibilities that Chisenhale offered, both in terms of all these different practices, dance styles, and people from different dance backgrounds, the possibilities of that coming together and what might happen in a workshop or a class or the development of a new performance, but also the possibilities of that collective and member-led structure gave you as an independent dancer, as opposed to someone going into somebody else's space or being part of a company, or so I guess it opened different possibilities on different levels, and also possibilities of meeting new people.
Yes. New collaborators, finding dancers to work in your own work, working with other people, doing workshops with other people. Absolutely. Yeah. It was. There was a great, I mean, I think it was Sue McLennan that sort of said, when we talked about Chisenhale having this community, this sort of sense of community, it really was also the community of artists. We mustn't forget that was a sort of burgeoning community, and that we were serving each other as well and giving ourselves opportunities, or Chisenhale gave us opportunities to perform with people in a way that you couldn't otherwise, through workshops into performance. Sue did loads of those, so as did, and Jane Wells was involved in those too. So I found those really wonderful, and then I led some as well. So it was a way of kind of being a practicing artist and giving something to your fellow dancers and people who were interested in performing.
So what was it that you did at Chisenhale? What did you get up to in terms of how you use the space?
So I was rehearsing with Sue, probably, and I probably rehearsed definitely, not probably, we would have whole rehearsal periods making the work there, sort of 4-week blocks and things like that, making new work. And I think we'd often premiere work there and then take it to the bigger venues. So it would be a kind of way of working the work up to more mainstream venues. And I was doing workshops, I was going to see performances, probably saw quite a few cha-cha-cha nights, and performing my own work, as far as I can remember. That's what I'm a bit lost on. I can't remember what I would have been doing, what solos and then there were commissions. So there was the Gathering Light commission to make work with a photographer, and I think there were several of us that got those commissions. So really unusual commissions as well. So even if they were relatively small scale, they were big for, burgeoning. I was an emerging artist, really. I was only just beginning to make my own work. So it's around the big table having meetings. So I must have attended quite a few members' meetings, because they're very present in my mind, the gatherings and the endless talking around issues and what we were going to do and what we should do and the politics of things.
The Gathering Light project was a collaboration with Camera Works Gallery nearby. But that was a really interesting project, the photography collaboration. And how would you describe what Chisenhale was? Maybe more broadly, if you had to kind of describe what it was at that time.
The first thing I would say is that it was and we've talked about this, it's a geographic space. It was a home. It was a home base. So the sort of foyer, so if you think about the foyer, was big. It was like, so you'd walk up the stairs and you'd come into a kind of communal space, and with old sofas. And so we did gather there. That's where the meetings were. It's where you could have a cup of tea. It's where you had your lunch when you were rehearsing, and other people would come out and you'd see them working in the office. And so it felt, I would say it was almost like a community centre for independent dancers in a funny way. And then there was this extraordinary space. You open the door and there's this massive space, which was so big and so cherished and loved, and cold, in the winter, but beautiful in the summer. and it was one of the best dance spaces in London. It probably still is in its own way, but perhaps it's not quite recognised as that now. But that big square area of, more or less square area of floor is quite unusual. And then when we first moved in, I doubt there was the rate seating. I think I remember the rate seating going in. So maybe we sat on cushions and there were chairs. So it had a lovely homemade feel about it. Yeah, I would say it was a gathering place, and a place to try to nurture. I mean, gosh, it had its problems, but it was trying to nurture art and experimentation and less mainstream ways of making work, giving artists a platform to present their work.
Yeah, I think that does seem to align with what you were saying earlier as well about it when you came back from America and you wanted a base, which also means space, and it means kind of people as well.
Yes.
And you talked about that you and Sue would tour and you would rehearse for a long time at Chisenhale, but then the performance would tour elsewhere, and so Chisenhale was sort of this nourishing base where you could develop and try things, and kind of a resource where you could get influences from people and share stuff, and then maybe people as independent dancers go off and teach elsewhere, perform elsewhere, but then come back home to the base at some point.
No, that's right. I think, and it's sort of a seedbed as well in a way. I remember perhaps we even used that term seedbed for some things, because it was definitely felt like, as you said, nurturing resources. I mean, the resources were very small, but it's still, the space was such a resource, and it was cheaper. But yeah, no, I think sometimes Chisenhale would describe itself as a springboard for things, or a stepping off point. So as if you went there when you were an emerging artist and then you moved on. And I resisted that for quite a while after the 80s, kind of sort of resisted thinking it was only that, because there were plenty of mature artists kind of coming through or coming back, or but in retrospect, I suppose, it was that as well. It was a springboard for people to move on in their careers, and it's still doing that. I can still see that happening. But for a while I was very resistant to that and wanted it to have a much more intergenerational feel. And I think some people like Amanda Leon would have wanted that as well. Different people who were in the office would encourage mature artists to be there. So
yeah, I can see that with the springboard, because for me the springboard seems like it only goes one way as well, whereas well, from my reading of Chisenhale at the time it was very much two-way, and things would feed back in as much as they were springing out, and so things were kind of bouncing all over the place. So someone might bounce out but then might come back later or something. But I think the springboard, in the sense that it gave a platform to young independent, well, not even necessarily young like you're saying, but independent dance artists that actually didn't really exist elsewhere, particularly for ways of working that you were describing, like ways that Sue was working and maybe you were working as well, and those possibilities that it provided, working with other people, communities, community groups, schools. So I think that was sort of seems to be unique about it.
Yeah, there was nowhere else like it. There's no question. I mean, as far as I know, there was no artist-led space either. I mean, it was very, I feel it was very radical, even though we had to fight our corner a lot. And I can't stress how many times we would cycle around with conversations. The thing is, I can't tell you what about, but I'm sure you would find it in notes. But I just remember thinking, oh, not that again. So, but yeah, that's all part of the bouncing and circling as well, and how difficult it is to stay radical, or to work out what you are and what you should do and what you shouldn't do, and all those issues. So in a way, it meant that the work was, when I think back, it kept me socially engaged. I wanted that. Although I might have got exasperated by some of the conversations, I also wanted it. So I wanted to be alive in the art and in the way it kind of the interface with society and how, yeah, and political issues and social issues. Yeah.
And at that time, was there a sense that it was familiar? There were a group of people that would be there regularly, that you know, when you would go, you would kind of recognize people, or you would know who might be around?
Yes. Yeah. Yes, but I was thinking that when we've talked about kind of all the different activities that you're finding in the archive, that it was just such a big group of people. I did know so many people by sight and to say hello to. I can see them now in my mind's eye, and they would be in the audience and they would be dancing, and they might come to a workshop. They're probably a member. Some of them weren't members. So you could argue, I suppose, that it was a little bit, it could be seen as a bit insular and sort of feeding itself in a way. But on the other hand, I think you're right that things bounced outwards, and that people, you know, especially where people are now, when I think back to the people I knew in the 80s and who they're teaching and what they're doing, you know, it left its mark. But yes, you definitely didn't. You definitely saw people that you knew and familiar faces, and yeah, in a way that perhaps I wouldn't feel now in a venue. So and that was lovely, but perhaps it was too small. I don't know. But at the time, it was hugely nourishing. You're right. Your words were right. Yeah.
And maybe this will be my last question, but and it's related to lots of things you've said already, so hopefully it's still relevant. But what was Chisenhale to you personally? Or why was it important to you, particularly at that time, either in terms of your practice or...
Yeah, I probably have answered it in some ways. I think I mean, if we talk on a personal level, I suppose when I got back from the States, I probably felt a little bit lost, because I didn't know where to go to kind of feel part of the scene or to feel part of the dance world. And I knew I came back from the States because I knew I wanted to make work, and I felt that the sensibilities of my work would never work in America. I felt there was an Englishness to the work. I kind of felt there was a sort of particular nuance to it that was very un-American. And even though at that time that was the sort of place of dance, I felt I needed to come back to Britain. And so I had to sort of start afresh, because I'd been away. It wasn't long, but it was, in my eyes, that when you're young, you feel like it's an age, you know. And so I felt I needed to start afresh. I knew Sue, and she'd been to America, and I'd met her there too. So there were people I knew, but I was kind of starting again after doing that in New York, and I felt quite alone and a bit lost. So personally, for me, Chisenhale was definitely an anchor into a world where I could sort of belong. I mean, I don't know if I'd say I felt I completely belonged, but it certainly helped shape, well, what bits do I feel, you know, really akin to, and where don't I fit? So in that sense, it helps you sort of say, this is the kind of work I make, and this is what I can't do, and this is what I can do. And my aesthetic was a bit different to a lot of the work I was seeing there. So it was kind of fine-tuning where could I place myself? Where could I place the work? Where could I place myself? And Chisenhale helped me do that. I'm not saying I felt like I was right in the heart of it. It's more that it helped me understand where I'd have to sort of forge my path to make the work I wanted to make. Or, you know, how you sort of trying to place yourself as an artist, or work out, well, would I put it there? Would it be presented there? Or am I aiming for there? Or where am I aiming? Or who wants me? Who would want this work? And I have always straddled many different spaces and different ways of being. And I had one foot in Chisenhale, but I had the other foot in small scale, middle scale kind of touring venues with Sue. And I liked going to, did I go to the play? I was certainly at Riverside a lot, and at the ICA I was looking at more mainstream stuff. I was looking at Dance Umbrella work. and still watching the smaller little, you know, pieces, the wonderful pieces. I loved watching stuff at Chisenhale. Often it was the stuff I liked the most. So I was trying to stay very open and eclectic in my taste, and starting to go to theatre, more theatre. So I guess it was a way of finding out who I was by knowing who I wasn't as well.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and also I was a great believer in people coming together to do something together, to fight for a cause or to make a space happen. So I think I really admired that in Chisenhale, in what people were doing and how they were doing it together.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you very much for sharing that with me and talking to me about your experience of Chisenhale.
Pleasure.
That was great. Thank you.